They were beautiful, young, and in love, but behind closed doors, they were monsters. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka seemed like the perfect couple until the truth came out. Their crimes would become some of the most shocking in Canadian history. But the most chilling part? One of them walked free. How did this happen? Let's dive into this disturbing story of Canada's most infamous killer couple. Hi guys, my name is Aurora. Welcome to my basement where everything is work in progress just like me. This video will be part of an ongoing series. I am embarking on a journey to identify, analyze and explore the most infamous criminals from around the world. If you would like to see more, please consider subscribing. You are the ones encouraging me to continue and I thank you very much for that. Now let's dive into our case. Paul Bernardo was born on 27th of August 1964 in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, into what seemed like a normal middle-class family. Behind closed doors, his childhood was anything but idyllic. His father, Kenneth Bernardo, was later revealed to be a convicted child and his mother, Marilyn, withdrew from the world, retreating into the basement in shame. Paul, however, wore a different mask, one of charm, politeness, and an almost unsettling perfection. People describe him as a clean-cut, well-mannered young man, someone who always knew the right thing to say. But beneath that carefully crafted persona, darkness was already festering. As a teenager, Paul developed an obsession with dominance and control, devouring violent pornography and honing his ability to manipulate those around him. By the time he attended the University of Toronto's Scarborough campus, his smooth-talking, confident exterior made him popular with women. Yet behind the scenes, he was a liar, a serial liar actually, emotionally abusive and already displaying disturbing patterns of behavior. Friends noticed his cruel streak, but they dismissed it. They most likely thought it is an arrogance a trait than rather sign of something far more sinister. It wouldn't be long before the mask slipped entirely. What began as controlling relationships soon escalated into something far more terrifying. The man who once seemed like the perfect boyfriend was about to become one of Canada's most infamous predators. Continuing with Karla Homolka, she was born on 4th of May 1970 in Port Credit, Ontario, Canada, the eldest of three daughters in what appeared to be a picture-perfect family. She was blonde, she was bubbly and well-liked, an animal lover with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. To the outside world, Karla was the ideal daughter, the girl who worked at a pet shop and gush about her love for animals. But beneath her sweet exterior, there were early signs of something unsettling. She had a fascination with the macabre, an attraction to the dark and forbidden, though no one around her saw it as a warning sign. At 17 years old, everything changed. While attending a pet convention in Toronto, she met Paul Bernardo. He was older, confident, and dangerously charming. Their connection was instant, intense, obsessive. Karla wasn't just drawn to Paul, she was captivated by him. And as the relationship deepened, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a passive participant in his dark fantasies, she became an active accomplice. Those closest to her noticed the change. The once headstrong, independent young woman began bending to Paul's every whim, molding herself into his perfect partner. But no one could have imagined just how far she would go to prove her devotion. The young woman who once seemed harmless would soon become one half of Canada's most notorious couple. Going to the background of the crime and how the timeline actually evolved, it began with whispers in the shadows, reports of a predator stalking the quiet streets of Scarborough, Ontario. Women describe a man who struck like a phantom, attacking in the dead of night, vanishing before anyone could catch a glimpse. They called him the Scarborough Rapist, and for years he remained just that, a faceless menace. But behind the mask of darkness, it was Paul Bernardo, a man who lived a double life. By day, he was a charismatic and well spoken, a seemingly normal young man with a steady job. By night, he was a predator, growing bolder with each attack. What no one knew was that he wasn't working alone. At home, he had Karla Homolka, his fiancée, a woman who should have been horrified by his crimes, but instead, she was an accomplice. Their descent into true horror began in December 1990 when Paul decided his victims weren't enough. He wanted more. And Karla? She was willing to give it to him. In what would later become one of the most disturbing acts of complicity in criminal history, Karla offered her own 15-year-old sister, Tammy Homolka, as a gift to Paul. She stole animal tranquilizers from the veterinary clinic where she worked, drugged her sister, and watched as Paul committed the unthinkable. They recorded everything, laughing and whispering like lovers sharing a secret. But the night took a tragic turn. Tammy began to choke on her own vomit, her body convulsing. Instead of calling for help, Paul and Karla cleaned up the evidence, redressed her, and staged the scene to look like an accident, a tragic accident. Paramedics arrive, they play the role of grieving siblings. No one suspected a thing. With their first murder behind them, the couple became even more depraved. Over the next 2 years, they kidnapped, tortured, and murdered at least two more young girls. Leslie Mahaffy, 14, and Kristen French, 15. They lured Leslie into their home in June 1991, where she was blindfolded, assaulted, and forced to endure hours of torment while Paul and Karla filmed her suffering. When they were done, they killed her and cast her body in concrete and dumped it into a lake. Less than a year later, in April 1992, they struck again. Kristen French was walking home from school when the couple, posing as a lost husband and wife, pulled up beside her. Karla held a map, pretending to need directions. She was the modern GPS, only far more deadlier. Kristen, always kind-hearted, leaned into to help, just as Paul attacked, forcing her into the car. For 3 days, she suffered at their hands, enduring unspeakable horrors. But unlike Leslie, Kristen saw their faces. She knew too much. When they were finished, Paul and Karla strangled her to death and dumped her body in a ditch, leaving her family and the entire country reeling. For a time, they seemed untouchable. Paul was still attacking women in Scarborough, his confidence growing. He was escalating from deed to deed, but the noose was tightening. A composite sketch of the Scarborough Rapist had been circulating for years, and in 1990, police had even interviewed Paul as a potential suspect. His ex-girlfriends had reported him, mentioning his violent tendencies. They had a trace. Police for the first time had a trace. But without concrete evidence, police let him go. In 1992, another critical mistake was made. Paul provided a DNA sample when questioned about the Scarborough attacks, but due to backlog and inefficiency, the results were delayed for over 2 years. So 2 years in which these two monsters were still free to do their horrendous deeds, only because police at that moment was incompetent. It wasn't the police who cracked the case first. It was Karla. By 1993, the relationship had turned violent. As I've mentioned, Paul was actually growing and escalating from violence deed to violence deed, and it was just a matter of time until he hit Karla. She wasn't about to accept it. Paul was no longer just abusing strangers, he was beating her as well. She finally sought refuge with her family, showing up to work with black eyes, her mask of perfection slipping. When she confided in friends that Paul had been responsible for Tammy's death, the truth began to unravel. Police reopened the case, now viewing her as a potential victim. Then, in early 1993, the long-awaited DNA results came back, and they confirmed what investigators had suspected for years. Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough Rapist. He was arrested in February 1993, and when police searched his home, they made a chilling discovery. Dozens of videotapes documenting their crimes. But there was a problem. Karla had already made a deal with the police. Before the tapes were found, Karla had positioned herself as a battered woman. She essentially played the victim's card, who had been forced into crimes against her will. This was further than all we can imagine. The prosecution, desperate for testimony against Paul, struck a plea bargain, a deal that would later be dubbed the deal with the devil. In exchange for her cooperation, she received a 12-year sentence while Paul faced life in prison. But when the videotape surfaced, revealing Karla's active participation, her laughter, her willingness, her pleasure in the suffering, the public was outraged. It was too late to take the deal back. That was the big mistake. Paul Bernardo was convicted of multiple counts of and murder in 1995 and remains in prison to this day. Karla Homolka, however, walked free in 2005, sparkling national outrage. She changed her name, started a new life, and even married and had children. The woman who once helped orchestrate the brutal deaths of teenage girls now lived as a suburban mother, a fact that still chills many Canadians to this day. The crimes of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka remain some of the most disturbing in Canadian history. They weren't just killers, they were partners in evil, a duo whose love story was written in blood. And despite the passage of time, the scars they left on their victim's family and on the nation have never fully healed. I'm curious to know your opinion. Why did a couple seemingly perfect from the outside could do such horrendous acts of violence, especially against children, or in our case, teenage girls? There are some answers coming from the psychologists and criminologists who have been studying such chilling dynamics. And it seems the chilling dynamic between Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, trying to understand how two people could feed so dangerously off each other's darkest desires, have come to some conclusions. On the surface, their relationship followed a classic folie à deux, a rare psychological phenomenon where two people, often in an intimate relationship, spiral into shared delusions or criminal behavior. But what made them particularly disturbing was how willingly Karla participated, even when most of would expect her to be the victim. So it's just a matter of the fact that nobody see that coming. Paul was the exact textbook psychopath, charming, manipulative, and utterly without remorse. He craved control, not just for his victims, but over Karla as well. He used humiliation, coercion, and emotional manipulation to tighten his grip on her, much like domestic abusers who slowly strip away their partner's sense of self. But Karla wasn't like the most victims. Unlike traditional cases of battered women who comply out of fear, she didn't just submit, she engaged. She laughed at his jokes, helped him plan, and even played an active role in their crimes. Some experts argue she exhibited traits of coercive control victimization, that she was emotionally broken down by Paul's dominance. Others point to her own narcissistic and antisocial tendencies, suggesting she wasn't just influenced, she enjoyed the power, the thrill of pleasing him. When later questioned about her involvement, her responses were cold, detached, and disturbingly rehearsed, as if she saw herself as a character in a story rather than a real person with real consequences. What remains unsettling is how, in many ways, they were the perfect storm. Alone, Paul may have continued with his violence, but with Karla, he had something even more dangerous: validation. She didn't stop him, she encouraged him, and together they became one of the most terrifying killer couples in history. The aftermath of their crimes left an indelible mark on Canadian society. The sheer brutality of their action and the mishandling of the case forced significant changes in law enforcement and the judicial system. Public outrage over Karla's plea deal led to reforms in how deals are negotiated, particularly in cases involving violent offenders. The case also ignited a national conversation about domestic violence, coercion, and the role of women in crimes traditionally attributed to male perpetrators. Schools began implementing more awareness programs on personal safety, and technological advancements in DNA testing and forensic science were prioritized to prevent further delays in capturing violent criminals. The echoes of Bernardo and Homolka's crime still haunt Canada, serving as a grim reminder that true evil can lurk behind the most ordinary of masks. And for my video, the selection criteria for Canada's most notorious killers was made by using the items below. I've considered impact and infamy, international recognition, and last but not least, crime scale and severity. Other candidates on this short list were Robert Picton, a serial killer and pig farmer from British Columbia, convicted of murdering numerous women, with many victims still unaccounted for, and Clifford Olson, a serial killer from the 1980s who murdered at least 11 children and teens, known for striking a controversial deal with authorities for information on his victims. Let me know if you are interested in these cases as well. In the end, I chose the killer couple since it sparked such tremendous changes in Canada at all levels. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka weren't just criminals, they became the dark blueprint for a killer couple. A case so shocking that it forever altered Canada's perception, idea of evil. Their crimes were not random acts of violence, but a calculated partnership fueled by control, manipulation, and mutual depravity. I chose them as Canada's most infamous criminal not just because of the brutality of their action, but because of the psychological complexity behind them. They weren't driven by desperation or necessity, but by the thrill of power, cruelty, and dominance. Their case forced the country to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, morality, and the very nature of evil hiding behind suburban smiles. As for Karla Homolka, her ability to slip back into society after such unimaginable crimes raises a chilling question. Do people like her ever truly change? Research on female accomplices in violent crimes suggests that while some are coerced, others, like Karla, exhibit traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, often called the dark triad of personality. Individuals with these traits lack empathy, manipulate without remorse, and most disturbingly can mimic normalcy so well that they can evade suspicion. While traditional rehabilitation programs work for many offenders, those with deep-seated psychopathic tendencies often do not cure in the conventional sense. Instead, they adapt, finding new ways to manipulate and control. Whether Karla has truly left her past behind or simply learned to mask it better remains an unsettling mystery. When the truth about the flawed police investigation emerged, public outrage was immediate. People demanded action, insisting that the system needed to change, and fast. In hindsight, the case of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka stands as a stark reminder of how critical mistakes and missed opportunities allowed a dangerous predator to remain free for far too long. For years, the Scarborough Rapist terrorized women, and despite multiple reports, descriptions, and even tips naming Paul as a suspect, investigators failed to act decisively. In 1990, police collected his DNA but let him go, unaware that the very sample they had in evidence would later confirm his guilt. 2 years too late came this breakthrough. Bureaucratic backlogs and outdated forensic processes left a brutal killer on the street, emboldening him to escalate from assault to murder. The aftermath of the case forced a reckoning within Canadian law enforcement. The failure to process DNA in time led to major reforms in forensic science, including faster DNA testing, the establishment of a national DNA databank, and improved coordination between police departments. Profiling techniques were also refined, ensuring that reports of serial offenders would be taken more seriously and cross-checked between jurisdictions. Additionally, plea bargaining practices were scrutinized with public outrage over Karla Homolka's deal, influencing stricter evaluations of accomplice testimonies in violent crimes. The Bernardo Homolka case became a turning point, showing Canada that justice delay is justice denied, and that monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live right next door. As of January 2020, Karla Homolka was reported to be living in Quebec without her husband or children. She had previously resided in Chateauguay, Quebec with her family, where her presence near local school caused public concern. Homolka has maintained a low profile, and there is limited public information about her current activities or her relationship with her remaining family members. Regarding apologies, there is no public record indicating that Homolka had issued an apology to the family of her victims or her own family for her actions. As we reflect on the horrors of Paul, Bernardo, and Karla Homolka's case, it's impossible to ignore the disturbing reality of how Karla used her own appearance and charm to manipulate and deceive, luring young girls into unimaginable horrors. She didn't just betray their trust, she used her role as a woman, someone who was supposed to protect, to become the instrument of their suffering. The chilling truth is that she willingly handed over these innocent victims to her fiancé, enabling his monstrous acts and leaving a trail of devastation in her wake. This case serves as a haunting reminder: guard down, because evil doesn't always come in the forms we expect. People you might see as harmless can harbor unspeakable secrets, and sometimes the very ones we trust the most are the ones capable of the most unimaginable betrayals. Let this be a sobering lesson to always question the narratives that others try to create, and never underestimate the capacity for manipulation, even from those who appear the least likely. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you to take care of yourself first. Bye.